December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The forest was a fairy tale, and the fairy tale was a nightmare. For the past 6 weeks, this sector of the Western Front had been a ghost front, a quiet, forgotten place where battle-weary American divisions were sent to rest and recover. It was a place where green, untested replacement troops, the FNGs, or fucking new guys, were sent to get used to the sounds of a war that seemed by all accounts to be already over. The Ardennes was beautiful, ancient snow-covered pine trees so dense they formed a black-green canopy, quaint stone villages with names like Bastogne, Saint-Vith, and Clairvaux. The air was frigid but clean. It smelled like Christmas. Private First Class Don Schoolboy Smith, 19 years old, from a two-street town in Ohio, certainly thought so. He was a replacement, assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. But there was no screaming here. The 101st Heroes of Normandy were in Mourmelon, France, 100 miles away, resting, drinking, and waiting for their holiday passes. Smith was just a new guy, holding a quiet line, his biggest enemy not the Germans, but the profound, bone-deep cold. He was, by every definition, a farm boy. He had grown up working a plow, his hands thick and calloused, his view of the world shaped by the flat, endless cornfields of the Midwest. He was quiet, stubborn, and profoundly unimpressed by the glory of war. He just wanted to do his job and go home. "You think we'll get turkey, Sarge?" he asked his squad leader, a 23-year-old veteran named Pops Guarnere. "Turkey? Forget turkey, kid," Pops grunted, huddled over a tiny, smokeless fire. "I'm just hoping for dry socks. This is the quietest front I've ever been on. It's spooky." He was right. Across the border in Germany, something was not quiet. Something was moving. This was Hitler's last desperate, insane gamble. An operation codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. The Allies would call it the Battle of the Bulge. It was an offensive of unprecedented scale and secrecy. Hitler had amassed 300,000 of his best, most fanatical troops, including the elite 1st and 12th SS Panzer Divisions, battle-hardened, arrogant veterans of the Eastern Front, men who saw themselves as Wagnerian supermen. Their mission? To punch a hole through the weak American line in the Ardennes, race to the Meuse River, and capture the vital port of Antwerp. They would, Hitler promised, surround and destroy 4 entire Allied armies. They would force a separate peace, and they were counting on one single fatal American weakness. They were counting on the stubborn farm boys to be soft. A German SS Panzer Grenadier, a 20-year-old veteran named Karl Renner, crouched in the German forest, looked at the quiet American line just 500 yards away. His officer had briefed them. "The men you are facing," the officer, a man with a dueling scar and a voice like gravel, had said, "are not soldiers. They are shopkeepers. They are farmers' sons. They are soft, decadent, chocolate-eating children who have never known a day of hardship. They are replacements, terrified of the cold, terrified of the dark. They are guarding this line because they think the war is over. They are expecting Christmas, not a war. You are the Leibstandarte. You are the pure Aryan steel of the Reich. You will not fight them. You will brush them aside." Karl Renner believed him. He checked the action on his MP-40 submachine gun. He looked at the massive, camouflaged shape of the King Tiger tank waiting behind him. This would not be a battle. It would be a race. 0530. AM December 16th. The sky did not light up. The ground did. 1,000 German artillery pieces hidden in the forest all fired at the same instant. The sound was not a boom. It was a physical event. It was the sound of the world ending. Private Don Schoolboy Smith was thrown from his bunk, his ears instantly deafened, the air in his small dugout turning to dust and smoke. The barrage was a rolling, deafening, psychological sledgehammer designed not just to kill, but to terrorize. He scrambled into the snow-filled trench, his M1 Garand in his hand. He was wearing his long underwear and his boots. He didn't even have his helmet. "What is it?" He screamed at Pops, but he couldn't hear his own voice. Pops, the veteran, was pale. He was staring, his mouth open, at the forest. Through the trees in the pre-dawn gloom came the sound, a low, rumbling, clanking sound, a sound that made the earth itself tremble. Tanks. They're here, Pops whispered. Then the shopkeepers and farm boys of the 28th and 99th Infantry Divisions did something the SS did not expect. They didn't surrender. They didn't run. They fought. They fought from their foxholes, from their dugouts, from ditches. They fought with rifles and bazookas against 70-ton King Tiger tanks. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and terrified. But they were stubborn. They held the line for 6 hours. Then 12. They were annihilated. They were overrun. They were butchered. But they did not break. They slowed the SS Panzer divisions down. They created a traffic jam. They traded their lives for time. And that time was all the Allies needed. 100 miles away in Montmelon, the 101st Airborne, the real Screaming Eagles, were shaken awake. Their Christmas leave was canceled. "Get on the trucks," a frantic officer yelled. "All of you, now!" "Where are we going?" a paratrooper asked. "To a town you've never heard of, a town called Bastogne. Now move." The 101st Airborne, with no winter gear, not enough ammunition, and not enough food, were thrown onto fleets of open-backed cattle trucks. They were a fire brigade, racing toward the biggest fire of the war. They were a division of farm boys, and they were about to have a head-on collision with the most elite stormtroopers Hitler had ever produced. The SS Leibstandarte was about to find out what happens when you corner a stubborn farm boy. December 17th, 1944, the Ardennes, Belgium. The German offensive was a masterpiece of speed and terror. It had punched a 50-mile-wide hole in the Allied line, a bulge that was growing by the hour. For Karl Renner, the SS Panzer Grenadier we met in Part 1, the war had become a race. He was no longer a soldier. He was a passenger on a 50-ton Panther tank, part of the elite Panzer Lehr division. They were the armored spearhead. They rumbled past the burning, blackened wrecks of American Sherman tanks and M10 destroyers, the ones that had stubbornly tried to hold the line. The snow-covered fields were littered with the frozen bodies of the farm boys from the 28th Infantry. Karl felt nothing but a cold, satisfied contempt. The officer had been right. They were shopkeepers. They had died where they stood, bravely but stupidly clutching their useless rifles. "They have no spirit," his tank commander yelled down to him, his voice triumphant over the roar of the Maybach engine. "They have no will. They are a nation of comforts. Look." He pointed to a captured American supply truck, its contents spilled onto the road. Cartons of Lucky Strike cigarettes, boxes of Hershey's chocolate bars, nylon stockings. "This is their army," the commander laughed. "They fight with chocolate. We fight with steel." Karl Renner grinned. This was not a war. It was a harvest. Their objective was just ahead, a small, insignificant Belgian town that sat on a critical junction of 7 roads. The officer had pointed to it on the map. "Bastogne," he'd said, dismissing it with a wave. "It is a crossroads, nothing more. It is guarded by a few retreating engineers and stragglers. We will be through it by noon tomorrow. Then, Antwerp." They were the elite. They were the Übermenschen, the supermen, and they were racing to brush aside a town full of terrified, fleeing farm boys. They didn't know who they were really racing. December 18th, 1944. A highway in northern France. Private Don Schoolboy Smith was going to lose his feet. He was sure of it. He was one of 11,000 men of the 101st Airborne, crammed into a fleet of open-backed deuce-and-a-half trucks, part of a massive, frantic convoy that was quite literally the Red Ball Express. In reverse, they had been driving for 18 hours straight, with no sleep, no stops, and no idea where they were going. And it was cold. It wasn't the cold of Ohio. This was a wet, invasive, malicious cold, a 40-mile-per-hour wind chill in a truck bed that turned every man's breath to instant frost. Smith's summer-issue jacket was useless. His boots were thin. His socks were soaked. He had no winter gear, no gloves, no white camouflage. He and every man around him was just a shivering, miserable lump of humanity. "Where the hell are we?" he chattered, his teeth clacking together so hard his jaw ached. "Belgium, kid," Pops Guarneri grunted, his face a mask of gray frozen stubble. "Near a place called Bastogne, that's what the driver said." "Bastogne?" another trooper said. "What the hell is a Bastogne?" "It's a crossroads," Pop said, his voice grim. He was a veteran. He understood maps. "It's the only crossroads. It's the one place all the roads meet, which means that's where they are going." A cold, different from the wind, washed over the truck. "So, what's the plan, Sarge?" Smith asked. Pops looked at the kid. He saw the farm boy in his eyes, the stubbornness, the fear. "The plan? The plan is we get there first. We get there, we dig in, and we hold. That's the job. We're airborne. We hold." They were a division of paratroopers, men trained to attack, being used as a desperate defensive plug. They were being thrown into the path of 3 elite SS Panzer divisions, with no winter clothes, not enough ammunition, and not enough food. December 18th, 1944. 23. 11 Hyralis p.m. The town square, Bastogne. The 101st convoy rumbled into the small stone town. It was pitch black, and it was chaos. The town was not quiet. It was a river of retreat. American tanks, Shermans from the 10th Armored, were streaming past them, going east to set up a thin, desperate screen. Wounded, shattered, shell-shocked remnants of the 28th Infantry were walking through the streets, ghost-like, their eyes hollow, They were the stubborn farm boys who had been hit by the first wave. A retreating sergeant, his arm in a bloody sling, saw Smith and the other paratroopers climbing stiff-legged out of their trucks. "Don't stop!" the sergeant yelled, his voice cracking. "Don't stop! They're right behind me. The Panzers, they're everywhere. It's over. They've broken through." This was the moment. The 101st had arrived at the exact terrifying instant that the last defenders were fleeing. They were the photo finish. An officer on a jeep roared up, "501st, you're with me. East Road. 506th, you take the road to Noville. 327th, you hold the south. Go, go, go." There was no time to rest, no time for hot coffee, no time to even find a building. "You heard him, schoolboy," Pops roared. "Grab your rifle, we're moving." Don Smith, frozen, exhausted, and confused, having not slept in 24 hours, found himself running down a dark, snow-covered Belgian road. He wasn't running from the fight, he was running toward it. He and his squad ran for 2 miles, until they hit a patch of dark, silent pine trees overlooking a long, sloping field. "Here," Pops yelled. "This is it. This is the line. Dig." Smith, his hand so numb he could barely feel the wooden handle, unslung his entrenching tool. He slammed it into the Belgian earth. It bounced, the sound a dull, metallic thunk. The ground was frozen solid. It was like trying to dig a hole in a steel plate. He looked at Pops, his face a mask of pure, childlike despair. "Sarge, it's frozen." Pops didn't even look at him. He was already scraping at the icy dirt with his bayonet. "I know, kid," he grunted, his breath pluming. "So dig faster." 10 miles down the same road, Karl Renner, the SS Panzergrenadier, was rolling through the night. The shopkeepers had all been brushed aside. Victory was certain. He and his comrades, the Supermen of the Reich, were about to take the crossroads of Bastogne. They had no idea who was waiting for them in the dark, in a shallow, frozen hole. They thought they were about to fight the farm boys. They were right. December 19th, 1944. 02:08 a.m. The woods near Noville, northeast of Bastogne. For 6 hours, Private Don Schoolboy Smith had been at war with the planet itself. His hands, raw and bleeding inside his thin wool gloves, were useless claws. His entrenching tool, a small folding shovel, was a joke. It bounced off the Belgian soil with a dull, metallic thunk. The ground was not just frozen, it was a solid, 8-inch thick plate of iron. I can't do it, Pops," he finally whispered, collapsing back, his breath pluming in the 10-degree air. He had managed to scrape a foxhole that was in reality a 6-inch deep depression in the snow, barely large enough for him to curl into. It offered no cover from artillery, no cover from tanks. It was just a shallow grave. "Get up, kid," Pops Guarneri grunted. He was using his bayonet, stabbing at the ground, trying to chip away frozen chunks of dirt. "You're airborne. You're supposed to be tough. You're a farm boy. You know how to dig." "This ain't Ohio dirt, Sarge," Smith chattered, his entire body convulsing in a violent, uncontrollable shiver. This is rock." "So dig in the rock," Pop said, not looking up. "Every inch you dig is an inch they can't kill. Now dig." This was the reality for the 11,000 men of the 101st. They had won the race. They had arrived at Bastogne just as the German armored spearhead, the elite Panzerlehr division, was closing in. They had plugged the hole, but they were an island in a sea of steel, and they were digging foxholes in a frozen rock quarry, with no food, no winter camouflage, and barely 24 hours worth of ammunition. They were, by all military definitions, a doomed force. 10 miles down the road, SS Panzergrenadier Karl Renner was no longer riding his Panther. He was on foot, moving with his squad through the black, snow-laden pines. The arrogance of the first day's race was gone, replaced by a cold, professional fury. The shopkeepers of the 28th Infantry had been scattered, but it had cost time, and now their advance on Bastogne had been stopped. "What is it?" Karl whispered to his squad leader, a veteran of Stalingrad named Wolf. "Why are we stopping? The road is clear." Wolf, his face a network of scars in the moonlight, put a hand up. He was listening. "The road is not clear," he whispered. "We hit a mine 200 yards up, and the patrols, they are not coming back." He pointed into the darkness. "They are here, new troops. They are not running. They are digging." Karl Renner scoffed, the sound a cloud of white vapor. "Digging? In this? They are fools. They are farm boys who do not know when to run. We will brush them aside, just like the others." "We will see," Wolf said. "This is not a line. This is a crust. We will break it. Our orders are to probe, find their machine guns, find their weak spot. Then the panzers will do the rest. Move." Back in his 6-inch deep scrape, Don Smith heard it. It was not the clank of a tank, not yet. It was the crunch of a boot on frozen snow. He froze. He stopped breathing. He put his head to the icy ground just as his grandfather, the farmer, had taught him to feel for the deer. He felt it. Vibrations. Men. Walking. Not one. A lot. "Pops," he breathed, his voice a tiny thread of panic. "Pops, they're here. They're walking." Pops Garnier slid into the scrape next to him, his bar, Browning automatic rifle, at the ready. "I see 'em," he whispered. 100 yards. A patrol. Don't fire. Don't you dare fire. Not until they're on top of us. We don't have the ammo to waste." The world went silent. The only sound was the pounding of Smith's own blood in his ears. He saw them now. 12 men, dressed in white snow camouflage ponchos, moving like ghosts through the trees. They were perfectly equipped. They were silent. They were professionals. Smith, in his dark olive drab jacket, stuck out against the white snow like a dead tree. Carl Renner was 75 yards from the American line. He could smell them. He could smell their cheap, sweet-smelling cigarettes. He could see their defenses. They were pathetic. Just a series of shallow scrapes in the snow, like a child had been playing. There were no bunkers, no concrete. "They are nothing," Carl whispered to Wolf. "They are farm boys. This is not a line. It is a joke." "Good," Wolf said. "Then we will end the joke. On my mark. Fire on the left scrape. I will take the right. We will kill them and be back for coffee." They raised their MP40s. In his hole, Pops grabbed Smith's arm. "They see us. Get ready, kid. On my mark." Smith couldn't breathe. This was it. This was the test. He was a farm boy from Ohio, and a white, ghostly Superman was 75 yards away, about to end his life. He was terrified. He was going to run. He was going to... "Now!" Pops roared. Pops's bar erupted, a heavy, deafening thump, 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 spitting a stream of tracers at Wolf's position. Carl Renner, at the same instant, pulled the trigger on his MP40. The German submachine gun fired a short, controlled, ripping sound. The 90mm bullet snapped over Smith's head, close enough for him to feel their heat, and thudded into the frozen dirt bank behind him. Smith didn't run. He didn't duck. He reacted. He was not a soldier. He was a farmer. And a predator was in his field. He raised his M1 Garand, the heavy 8-shot rifle his grandfather would have called a good, solid piece of American steel. He didn't fire at the noise. He didn't fire at the muzzle flash. He fired at the shape. He saw the white-clad ghost, Carl Renner, rising from the snow. He put the front sight post on the center of the man's chest. He held his breath. He was not in Bastonia. He was in Ohio. He was shooting a groundhog. He squeezed the trigger. Boom. The heavy, concussive crack of the M1 Garand was a different sound from the others. It was not the rip of the MP40 or the thump of the bar. It was a single, authoritative boom. A .30-06 round, a bullet designed to kill a moose, tore through the 75 yards of frozen air. Carl Renner, the SS Panzer Grenadier, the veteran of the Eastern Front, the Übermensch, felt a punch in his chest so violent it was as if a horse had kicked him. It didn't sting. It didn't burn. It was a blow that lifted him from his feet and threw him backward into the snow. He looked down. There was nothing, just a dark, spreading stain. He couldn't breathe. His perfect MP40 fell from his numb hands. His last dying, confused thought was they didn't run. Wolf, his squad leader, saw Renner fall. He saw 2 other men hit by Pops's bar, spin, and drop. This was not a pathetic line of stragglers. This was not a crust. These men were firing back. They were firing accurately. This was something new. "Back!" Wolf screamed in German. "Pull back! It's a hornet's nest! Pull back to the trees!" The surviving members of the SS probe team did not retreat. They vanished, melting back into the darkness, dragging their wounded. In the foxhole, Don Smith was shaking, his eyes closed. He had just killed a man. "Reload, kid," Pop said, his voice quiet, already jamming a new magazine into his bar. You reload," Pop said, his voice hard as the frozen ground. "That was just the appetizer. They know we're here now. And they're gonna be pissed. They just realized they're not fighting shopkeepers." Pop spat into the snow. "They just realized they're fighting the 101st. December 19th, 1944. 07 Duars a.m. The woods near Noville. Dawn arrived not as a light, but as a change in the quality of the darkness. The impenetrable black of the Ardennes night bled into a thick, suffocating gray-white fog. It was a fog so dense it felt solid, a wet, freezing blanket that swallowed the world, reducing visibility to less than 30 yards. Private Don Schoolboy Smith, his body a single agonizing ache from 12 hours of shivering in his 6-inch deep scrape, slowly raised his head. The ringing in his ears had been replaced by a silence more profound and terrifying than the noise of the firefight. The woods were dead. "Pops," he whispered, his voice a dry crackle. "I'm here, kid," Pops Garnera grunted from the next hole. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Smith carefully peered over the lip of frozen earth. In the ghostly gray light, he could see them. The supermen, the white-clad ghosts from the night before. 4 of them lay frozen in the snow, 50 yards away, twisted into the unnatural, broken poses of marionettes with their strings cut. One of them, he was sure, was the man he had shot, Carl Renner. The farmer boy had killed the Herrenvolk. The realization brought him no pride, only a sick, cold emptiness. They didn't even come back for their dead," Smith muttered, horrified. "They're SS kid," Pop said, his voice a low, hard growl. "They ain't sentimental, they're just busy. Reload. Check your feet." Smith fumbled with his M1, his fingers so numb they felt like frozen wooden sticks. He couldn't feel the cold metal of the 8-round clip. He had to watch his hands, guiding them by sight, forcing them to perform the simple, mechanical task. Reload. He looked at his boots. They were covered in a thick frost. He wiggled his toes. He felt nothing. This was the new enemy, an enemy more insidious than the Germans. The cold. The temperature had dropped to near 0 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 degrees Celsius. The cold stole your dexterity. It stole your will. It stole the grease from your rifle bolt. The 101st Airborne, still in the light fall jackets they had worn in France, were not just fighting the Wehrmacht, they were fighting the planet. And then the planet itself began to move. It started not as a sound, but as a vibration. A low seismic rumble that came through the frozen earth, felt in the bones, in the teeth. It was not the clack, clack, clack of a single patrol. It was the deep, multi-layered, grinding roar of an entire division. It was the sound of engines, hundreds of them. Pops Garnera's head snapped up, his veteran's ears instantly processing the threat. "Tanks," he breathed, his face pale under the grime. "That's not a patrol. That's the whole goddamn army." He was right. The SS probe had failed to brush them aside, so the German commanders had stopped probing and had begun to push. In the impenetrable fog, the elite 2nd Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr Division were no longer trying to be subtle. They were advancing in massive, armored columns, their Panther and Tiger tanks roaring, their diesel engines a deafening thunder that shook the pine needles from the trees. The fog, which made the 101st feel so isolated, was the Germans' greatest ally. It had grounded the entire Allied Air Force. The P-47 Thunderbolts, the little friends who normally ruled the skies, were sitting uselessly on frozen runways in England and France. The 101st was alone. The German realization had been swift and brutal. The Sturmbannführer, Major, who had received Wolf's report, was furious. His supermen had been stopped cold by a handful of farm boys in a ditch. The American stubbornness, their farmer quality, had just ruined his lightning-fast timetable. The new order was simple. Bypass. Do not get bogged down fighting these stubborn Americans in the woods. Encircle them. Leave them to freeze. Race past them, seize the crossroads at Bastogne, and cut them off completely. The massive, armored spearhead of the German army was now splitting, flowing around the 506th Regiment's forward position at Neuville like a river splitting around a rock. A field telephone in the command post, a frozen dugout in a dairy farm, rang. The order was frantic. Fall back. All units fall back to Bastogne. The line is not holding, it's being bypassed. I repeat, fall back to the main perimeter. You heard the man, Pops roared, kicking the snow off his pack. We're moving. Grab your gear, schoolboy. We're leaving. Smith stared. Leaving? But we held them. Yeah, kid, Pops said, grabbing his bar and the extra ammo belts. We held them, and they just went around us. This ain't our fight anymore. The real fight is at the crossroads. Let's go. The next 2 hours were a blur of panicked, stumbling retreat. Smith, Pops, and the survivors of their platoon abandoned their shallow graves and fell back, half running, half walking, through the frozen, fog-shrouded woods. The sound of the panzers was everywhere now, to their left, to their right. It was a race. They arrived at the outskirts of Bastogne just before noon. The town was unrecognizable. It was no longer a quaint, quiet village. It was a churning mass of retreating green-gray American metal. Trucks, half-tracks, Sherman tanks from the 10th Armored, and thousands of dazed, ghost-like infantrymen from the shattered 28th Division were all pouring into this one small town, clogging the 7 roads that led to its center. And then, the sound of the panzers stopped. A new, profound silence fell over the town, a silence broken only by the rumble of the last American tanks forming a perimeter. An officer, his face black with exhaustion, rode up on a jeep. "What's happening?" Pops asked him. The officer looked at him, his eyes dead. They're here. The 2nd Panzer just cut the road to Neufchâteau. The Panzer Lehr just cut the road to Wiltz. He pointed north. And the 116th is closing the road to Houffalize. That was the last one. He looked at the 11,000 men of the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, now crammed into this tiny, frozen Belgian town, with no winter clothes, low on ammunition, low on food, and surrounded by 50,000 elite German SS troops and 3 panzer divisions. "Congratulations, troopers," the officer said, his voice a flat, dead monotone. "You're the 101st, you're supposed to be surrounded." The farm boys from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Louisiana had won their race. They had arrived at the crossroads, and the German supermen had just slammed the door. The trap was set. The SS, furious that their race to Antwerp had been stopped by this stubborn pocket of resistance, now realized, with cold, mounting fury, that they would have to turn around. They would have to deal with the farm boys first. December 22nd, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. The Donut Perimeter. For 3 days the world had been silent, frozen, and gray. The fog had never lifted. It was a physical, suffocating presence, a ceiling of dirty cotton wool that pressed down on the 11,000 men of the 101st Airborne, sealing them inside their frozen trap. The fog was a prison. It grounded the Allied Air Force. It meant no resupply, no food, no ammunition, and critically, no medical evacuation for the hundreds of wounded men who were now dying, freezing to death in the basement of a shattered Belgian aid station. Private Don Schoolboy Smith, in his shallow, ice-hard foxhole on the perimeter's edge, had stopped feeling his feet 24 hours ago. They were just 2 solid, numb blocks of wood at the end of his legs. He was terrified to take his boots off. He knew what he would find. Black gangrene. "Pops," he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping click. I can't feel him, Pops." Pops Garnier, his face a skull-like mask of frozen stubble and black grime, didn't even look over. He was staring into the gray, silent void of the fog, his bar resting on the icy parapet. "Nobody can, kid," he grunted. "You take your boots off, you die. You fall asleep, you die. You stop moving, you die. So keep wiggling your toes and shut up." This was the reality of the siege. The stubborn farm boys had won the race. They had plugged the hole. But now they were surrounded by 3 elite SS panzer divisions, 50,000 men, hundreds of tanks, and they were slowly, methodically freezing to death. Their ammunition was critically low. They were rationing 5 rounds per man, per day. The artillery, which had been their salvation on the line, was down to its last handful of shells. The great Screaming Eagles were no longer an army. They were a starving, frozen, isolated garrison, waiting for the end. And the Germans knew it. In his heated command trailer just outside the perimeter, General Lieutenant Heinrich von Luttwitz, the commander of the German Ex-Sozialist Panzer Corps, looked at his maps. He was a man of the old Prussian aristocracy, a professional soldier who despised the new SS fanatics but loved victory. And victory was here. His intelligence was perfect. He knew the Americans were the 101st. He knew they were trapped. He knew they had no air support, no resupply, and were low on everything. He knew they were freezing. This was not a fight. It was a problem of logistics. "These Americans," he said to his chief of staff, "they are brave, but they are foolish. They have held up my timetable to the Meuse River for 3 days. This absurdity must end. They are surrounded. They have no hope. A professional soldier knows when he is beaten." He was, by his own code, a man of honor. He would offer them a chance to surrender. It was the polite, professional thing to do. It would save German lives, and more importantly, it would save time. "Send the truce party," he ordered. At 11:30 a.m., a strange procession emerged from the fog. 4 German soldiers, 2 officers, and 2 enlisted men walking under a massive, hastily made white flag. They approached the American line, the farm boy line. A bewildered American private, seeing the white flag, let them approach. "We have a written message," the German major said in perfect, arrogant English, "for the commanding general of the U.S. forces in Bastogne." The note was passed up the chain, from a frozen foxhole to a runner to a jeep, until it landed in the hands of the acting commander of the 101st Airborne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. McAuliffe, a short, energetic, cigar-chomping officer, was in his command post, a freezing, rubble-strewn Belgian barracks. He was in the middle of a desperate staff meeting about their total lack of ammunition. An aide handed him the typed German note. McAuliffe read it. It was a long, formal Prussian demand for the honorable surrender of the encircled town of Bastogne, warning of the total annihilation that would follow if they refused. McAuliffe stared at the paper. He read the part about honorable surrender again. Then he let out a short, barking laugh. a laugh of pure, unadulterated American disbelief. "Surrender?" he scoffed. "Us? Surrender?" He turned to his staff, his eyes alight with a kind of manic glee. "They want us to surrender. What do you think, boys?" There was a moment of silence. Then his operations officer, Colonel Harry Kinnard, spoke. "General," he said, a slow, tired smile spreading on his face, that's just nuts." McAuliffe's face lit up. "That's it. That's perfect." He grabbed a piece of paper. He wrote one single, beautiful, stubborn word on it. He gave it back to the aide. "Deliver this to the German officers. They're waiting." The 2 German officers, standing in the snow, stamping their cold feet, were impatient. They were supermen being forced to wait by farm boys. The American aide finally returned. He handed them the folded paper. The German major opened it. He stared at it. On the paper in the center was one word: nuts. The German major's face went blank. He was a professional. He spoke fluent English. But this was not in his dictionary. "I do not understand," he said, his voice stiff. "What does this mean? Is it a negative? Is it an affirmative?" The American aide, Colonel Joseph Harper, who had delivered the note, just grinned. "It means," he said, puffing his chest, "that you can all go to hell, and if you continue to attack, we will kill every last one of you." The German officers, their faces now purple with rage, turned on their heels and marched back into the fog. The farm boys had not just refused to surrender, they had laughed at them. When General von Lutwitz received the one-word reply, his aristocratic composure shattered. "Nuts? Nuts? What is this insult, this arrogance?" He now realized with a cold, burning fury what he was facing. He was not fighting a professional army that understood the rules of war. He was not fighting shopkeepers. He was fighting a gang of stubborn, illogical, arrogant farmers, and they had just spat in his eye. "So be it," von Lutwitz roared. "Total annihilation. Begin the assault. Level the town. Leave nothing. I want this nuts general's head." This was the moment of realization. The Germans, the SS, the professional supermen understood that their fatal mistake was not a tactical one. It was a cultural one. They had assumed their enemy thought like them. They had fatally underestimated the stubbornness of the American farm boy, and now they were going to pay the price. December 22nd, 1944, 2 p.m. The perimeter, Bastogne. The German honorable surrender had been a courtesy. The nuts reply had been an insult. What came next was physics. For 2 hours, the 11,000 men of the 101st Airborne simply ceased to exist. They were not soldiers. They were prey, cowering at the bottom of frozen holes as the world tore itself apart. General von Lutwitz was a man of his word. He had ordered total annihilation, and his artillery batteries, hundreds of 105 meters and 155 meters guns, were now attempting to level the town of Bastogne and its surrounding perimeter. The sound was not a boom. It was a continuous, rolling, seismic roar that did not stop, not for a second. The ground, which had been iron-hard, now bucked and heaved like a living animal. Massive, 100-foot-tall geysers of black and white earth erupted all along the perimeter. Trees, which had stood for 1,000 years, were vaporized, reduced to clouds of splinters. Stone farmhouses, which had served as command posts, simply vanished, their granite blocks thrown like pebbles. In his 6-inch deep scrape, Private Don Schoolboy Smith was no longer a human. He was just a pair of eyes, wide and white, in a face caked with black, frozen mud. He was curled into a tight fetal ball, his helmet scraping the icy dirt, his M1 Garand, his precious M1, clutched to his chest. He was deaf. The noise was so total, so absolute, that it had moved past sound and had become a pure physical vibration that rattled his teeth and blurred his vision. He was praying, not to God, just a low, animalistic, "Please stop, please stop, please stop." "Stay down, kid." Pops Guarneri's voice was a faint, tinny scream, even though he was in the next hole, only 5 feet away. "This is the softening up. This is what they do before they send in the steel." Pops was right. This was the classic German Sturmband tactic, a short, impossibly violent, psychologically shattering barrage, designed to turn a defender's brain to jelly, to make him run, to make him break. Then, after an eternity that lasted exactly 2 hours, it stopped. The silence that crashed down was more terrifying than the noise. It was a dead, ringing, empty world silence, broken only by the high-pitched screams of the wounded and the hiss of shrapnel fragments cooling in the snow. "Now," Pops whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He was already up, his bar on the lip of the parapet, his eyes straining, not at the field, but at the fog. The fog was their prison. It was still there, a thick, gray, impenetrable wall, and from inside that wall came the sound, the rumble, the heavy, grinding clank, clank, clank of dozens of tank treads chewing the frozen earth. It was not a probe. It was not a patrol. It was the Panzer Lehr Division, and they were coming. "They're coming!" Smith yelled, his voice cracking. He fumbled with his M1, his numb wooden fingers trying to chamber around. I can't see them." "You'll hear 'em first," Pops grunted, "and you'll smell 'em second. Diesel, get ready, kid. This is it. No retreat, no surrender. You're a farm boy. You know how to be stubborn." The stubborn farm boy. That was all he had. He wasn't an elite Stostrup. He wasn't a Superman. He was just a 19-year-old kid from Ohio who was too cold to run and too scared to die. The first shape emerged from the fog. It was not a man. It was a monster, a panther, a 50-ton beast of sloped gray steel, its long 75mm cannon swiveling, sniffing for targets. It was 100 yards out, a ghostly, impossible shape. Behind it, more shapes. Another panther, a Panzer IV, and behind them, the Panzer Grenadiers. The white camouflaged SS troopers, the ones from the night before, but hundreds of them fanned out, their MP40s at the ready. This was the sledgehammer. This was the annihilation that von Lüttwitz had promised. The German Panzer Grenadiers advanced with a terrifying, arrogant confidence. The barrage had done its work. The shopkeepers would be dead or insane with terror. This would be a mopping-up operation. A Panzerschütze, tank gunner, in the lead Panther, his name Otto, peered through his periscope. He saw the American line. It was pathetic. Just a few shallow scrapes in the snow. He saw no anti-tank guns, no bunkers. "Amateur!" he scoffed to his commander. "Farm boys, this will be over in 5 minutes." His commander gave the order. "Fire on the line. Führer." The Panther's main gun erupted with a deafening crack boom. The 75mm high-explosive shell hit a patch of trees 20 yards to Smith's left, vaporizing them. "Jesus!" Smith screamed, ducking. The tanks were rolling forward, firing their machine guns, a stream of tracers ripping the air above the foxholes. The Panzer Grenadiers were walking behind them, using the tanks as moving shields. It was a perfect, by-the-book, combined arms assault, and it was about to have a head-on collision with 11,000 stubborn farm boys. "Bazooka!" Pops roared. "Now, team, now!" Two men who had been hiding in a deeper, snow-covered hole suddenly jumped up. One of them had a long, hollow tube on his shoulder, the M1 bazooka. He was 50 yards from the lead Panther. It was a suicide shot. He fired, a whoosh of backblast, and the small 2.36-inch rocket streaked through the fog. It hit the Panther's frontal armor and bounced off. The thick, sloped steel of the Panther was immune. "It didn't work!" the bazooka man screamed. The Panther's coaxial machine gun answered, a short, vicious burst that cut the two-man bazooka team in half. "It's too strong," Smith yelled, his voice a sob. "He's too close," Pops roared back. "Let him pass! Let him pass!" This was the insane, desperate farmer's tactic. The farm boys of the 101st didn't have the guns to kill a Panther from the front, but they had guts. Smith and Pops ducked. They pressed themselves into the 6-inch deep mud, making themselves small. The 50-ton Panther tank, its engines roaring, its machine guns firing, rolled right over their foxholes. The ground shook. The noise was deafening. The smell of diesel exhaust filled Smith's lungs. He could feel the weight of the steel monster as it passed, 2 feet above his helmet. It was the most terrifying moment of his life. The tank, its crew blind to the men it had just passed, continued on, heading for the next line of foxholes. The instant its rear, with its thin, vulnerable engine armor, was exposed, Pops was on his knees. "Bazooka! Rear! Rear shot!" Another bazooka team, waiting 50 yards behind the first, now had a perfect point-blank shot at the Panther's ass. Whoosh crack! The rocket hit the rear engine plate. This time, it worked. A flash of bright orange, and the Panther lurched to a halt, thick, black smoke pouring from its engine deck. The Panzer Grenadiers, who had been using the tank for cover, were suddenly exposed. "Now!" Pop screamed, and all along the pathetic line, the farm boys stood up. They did not fire single accurate shots. They did not have the ammunition for a firestorm. They did what stubborn men do. They fought. Smith's M1 Garand cracked. A white-clad SS trooper fell. Pops's bar thumped. 2 more. The SS Sturmbannführer, who had been expecting a mopping up, watched in stunned horror. His lead tank was burning, and his elite veteran troops were being cut down. They were being beaten. They were being stopped by a line of half-frozen, half-dead amateurs in summer uniforms. He saw an American, a farm boy, run out of his foxhole at a Panzer IV, jump onto its back, and drop a grenade down the open commander's hatch. This was not a battle. This was madness. The stubborn farm boys were not breaking. They were holding. And the supermen of the SS, they were the ones who were dying. December 24th, 26th, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. Christmas in hell. The steel sledgehammer of the German assault had failed. The supermen had been stopped cold by stubborn farm boys. But the siege was far from over. Bastogne remained a frozen island surrounded by a sea of German steel choked by the relentless fog. Christmas Eve. Private Don's schoolboy. Smith huddled in his foxhole. He hadn't eaten a hot meal in days. His body was a shaking, aching shell. His feet were numb blocks. He hadn't slept for more than an hour at a time in a week. The sound of sporadic German shelling, the whizzing of incoming mortars, was constant. The crack of German sniper rifles echoed through the trees. "Merry Christmas, kid," Pops Guarneri rasped, handing him a K-ration cracker, dry and tasteless. Smith just stared at it. "Some Christmas," he muttered. "What's the plan, Pops? We gonna starve to death?" Pops didn't answer. He was looking up at the sky. And then, for the first time in 6 days, the miracle happened. The fog began to lift. Slowly, agonizingly, the gray ceiling began to break apart, revealing patches of pure, brilliant, impossible blue sky. And from that blue sky came a sound, not the roar of engines, not the clang of tanks, a high-pitched, insistent drone, and then they saw them. Hundreds of tiny silver specks glinting in the sunlight, C-47 transport planes. Goonie birds. They were the little friends from the sky. They were coming for Bastogne. The German anti-aircraft guns opened fire, a desperate, furious barrage, but it was too late. The C-47s, flying in perfect formation, began to drop their cargo. Not bombs, parachutes, hundreds of them. Red, green, yellow, blue, blossoming against the clear sky like a field of impossible flowers. Resupply, ammunition, food, medicine, hot coffee, and, critically, doctors. "Look, schoolboy," Pops screamed, his voice hoarse, his face split in a wide, triumphant grin. "Look, we made it! We made it!" Smith could only stare, tears streaming down his grimy, frozen cheeks. The sight of those parachutes, those simple bundles of hope, was almost too much to bear. The farm boys had held, and the world had come to their rescue. The Germans, who had been expecting a slow, agonizing surrender, were shocked. General Lieutenant Heinrich von Luttwitz, seeing the sky full of parachutes, raged in his command post. His stubborn farm boys had found a way. His siege was no longer effective. December 26, 1944. The sky was clear and the sound of distant but growing thunder could be heard from the south. General George S. Patton's Third Army, which had made an impossible 100-mile turn and driven through the snow, had finally punched a hole in the German lines. Bastogne was no longer completely encircled. The circle was broken. The farm boys of the 101st Airborne had held for 10 days against overwhelming odds in unimaginable conditions. They had turned a desperate defense into a symbol of Allied resolve. They had not just fought, they had refused to break. The Battle of the Bulge continued for another month, a brutal, grinding conflict. But the moment of decision, the moment when Hitler's last gamble had failed, was sealed in Bastogne. It was sealed by the stubborn farm boys who refused to yield. Private Don Schoolboy Smith survived Bastogne. He lived through the freezing cold, the endless shelling, and the terrifying assaults. He was evacuated with frostbitten feet, but he survived. He went back to Ohio after the war, a quiet man who had seen hell and back. He farmed his land. He raised his family. He was a farm boy through and through. The elite German SS Stormtroopers had come to the Ardennes expecting to brush aside shopkeepers and decadent farm boys. They had come with arrogance, with superior equipment, and with Hitler's last desperate hope. They had encountered not weakness, but a profound, unyielding stubbornness. The kind of stubbornness born from hard work, from enduring harsh winters, from knowing how to simply keep going when everything tells you to quit. The kind of stubbornness that, when cornered, will fight with a ferocity no Superman could ever comprehend. They had tragically, fatally underestimated the farm boys. And that fatal mistake cost them the Battle of the Bulge, and ultimately accelerated the end of the war. The unbroken circle of Bastogne stands as a testament to their quiet, unyielding courage.